Okay, hello. A quick update on Class UI. We've been exploring and trying to figure out how to best build for production. And this is actually surprisingly tricky because we we prioritize the developer experience, and the history of build tools and CSS is not super great. It can be very complicated to configure CSS transpiling. And the fact that we are only a bubble plugin also makes things trickier. But we think we have found, but like very often, restraints leads to better solutions. So hopefully that's the case here. So we have published a new version of Class UI on a beta tag, and then all the install sections has been updated. So I can just show you, for example, with Webpack, you just configure as normal. But as you can see, we have removed all the CSS loaders and all that stuff because you don't actually need it when you use Classy UI. So we have simplified the installation step on Webpack. And then we can move down to production. So what happens is that when Class UI builds for production, it will create a Classy UI file, like a CSS file, and it handles everything. It optimizes it, groups media queries and everything. It minifies it, cleans up stuff. It uses some other tools for that you don't have to think about. And then it puts that Classy UI CSS file in by default into a public directory. Now, different build tools uses different concept of a public directory. Webpack especially has like as many different build setups as there are projects. But this is kind of like a good thing that we're doing this, because then you have the flexibility to integrate it better with your build tool. So for Webpack, for example, some projects has a public folder or a static folder where you use the copy Webpack plugin to copy those files into your dist folder when you build. So for example, if that name is the public folder, you don't have to configure anything. But if the folder is called static, for example, you can go in and you can change the output directory of Classy UI to be static. But maybe you don't use the copy Webpack plugin at all. Maybe you just want to put the Classy UI CSS file directly into the dist folder that Webpack creates. And in that case, you can see an example here, how you change the output directory. So basically that's it. You have this output option where you want to put your Classy UI CSS file. So in the case of Webpack, you typically use the HTML Webpack plugin. And in this case, I'm just exposing a variable to the template, which tells us that we're in production, or if we're in production. And if we are in production, we check that, and then we insert the Classy UI CSS file. So if you don't use Webpack, I'll show you an example with Parcel and the others as well. But what's common to all of them is that we don't support hashing the output file. And the reason is very simple. Like we can create, like what I mean when I say hashing the file is that it would say classy-ui dot some hash dot css. And the hash would only change if the contents of the file would change, which is a really good way to manage caching. But currently we have not figured out how to do that in a good way. Like it's no problem to create the file name. The problem is passing that file name to the build tool so that it automatically brings it in. So we'll have to explore that a bit more. But at the same time, using e-tag is very effective. So when your app loads and you have the CSS file there, it will make a request to the server, but it will pass its own hash of the file and ask the server, has it actually changed? And if not, the server just responds, no, it hasn't changed. Or if it has changed, it responds with the actual new content of the CSS file. And of course, we do want to get to hashing, but that will have to be another, like a next step. Okay, and then we have Parcel. In production, we need to, oh, there's a typo. In production, we need to change the output to dist because that's the output of Parcel, unless you use something else, and then you would change it here as well. And it's actually nothing more than that. In the HTML of in the main HTML file, you can't actually insert like a style sheet link tag because Parcel will actually try to load that file because it parses the HTML and automatically finds like a reference to other files and stuff. So you'll have to insert a script tag instead, where in this case I'm checking if we're in production, and then I create the link tag and insert it on the head of the document. So this is like, it's the same thing. Yes, to actually set this production check, you'll have to use the environment variables approach in Parcel. So this is like, we are explaining like a lot related to environment variables here. And this is something you have to know about if you're actually going to deploy an app, typically. So this environment variable complexity is not really our complexity, it's the build tools complexity. But we wanted to like show you the full story of how you actually handle it. And then we have the same hashing versus e-tag. For create React app, we create React app uses a public directory for static assets, and that's where classy UI outputs the CSS. So all you need to do here is basically just add this snippet into the HTML file. And note that we also have this public URL thing here. Yes. Cool. And yeah, so create React app automatically exposes this and stuff like that. So it should be enough just to add this snippet. For Next.js, Next.js actually outputs its build to a next directory, like a next/build directory. But the classy UI output is considered a static asset, and so you should output that to Next.js has a concept of a public directory, which is its concept of a static, like where the static files are. So as I say here, luckily classy UI. Oh, that's a typo. But classy UI outputs to the public folder by default. You just have to make sure that it's actually there. So if you haven't created the public folder, create it. And then classy UI will output the styles file there. So to include that in production, you just need to add like the head component of Next.js. And there you can do a normal production check. And then you include the classy UI CSS file there. Yes, and then we only explain that if you happen to change the public directory path, you have to change the path on the output as well. Yes, so that's basically it. Yes, as I said, we have been thinking a lot about this, and there's this balance between doing the optimal thing for the user and also the optimal thing related to developer experience. Like you would never even try this tool because it would be so much stuff related to configuration, and we really prioritize that. It's not that we don't care about the user, but we have to nail the developer experience first, or there's no reason to create a tool at all. And then we will make sure that we optimize the project as much as possible. Like there's tons of optimizations we can still do here related to creating the production bundle and lots of different stuff. And that is what it's all about. Like we have to get it to a point where it's super useful, and then we'll iterate on optimizing the project. And hashing is part of that optimization story. Okay, cool. I guess that's it. I would love for you to just try to read the documentation and add the needed stuff for production and try it, just to get some feedback on, is the documentation okay? Does it work okay? And maybe you have some ideas to how we could do it differently. Maybe you even have an idea to how we could handle hashing. So just to point that out again, the challenge with hashing is that we can very easily create the file name in the Babel plugin. The problem is that the build tool using Babel needs to know about that file name, and we haven't figured out a way to like pass that file name over. Yes, I think there's little Mrs. here of 3 years old who's getting impatient. It's Saturday today. We have to do some family stuff, but I got this done, so now I can relax for the rest of the weekend. Okay, bye bye.